I listened to the interview with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan on Stone Cold's podcast. It was cool to hear the two of them interacting, two of the biggest names in the history of the business, and Hogan's got a lot of stories to tell. But because it's Hulk Hogan, and because of his history of telling fables, Aesop's got nothing on Hogan, it makes it hard to set the facts apart from all of the fiction. So you kind of hear what he has to say, and if it's something that is improvable, you just take it with a mound of salt. Hogan talked about being in constant pain from arthritis all over his body, traveling down to Guadalajara in Mexico for a stem cell treatment, and almost dying from this stem cell treatment. As soon as they put the needle in his arm, his eyes rolled back in his head like The Undertaker, because they had soaked the stem cells, he said, in DMSO, so that they wouldn't crystallize and when they froze them. And DMSO is a compound or a solvent or something like that. It's used by people for pain relief. Apparently, a lot of the wrestlers in the WWF locker room in Hogan's day used DMSO, but Hogan claims that he didn't, and so he had no idea that he was allergic to it. He had an allergic reaction, and he said if his wife wasn't there with him, we may have lost the Hulkster. And he says that the stem cells do help his back out a lot. He's had back problems for so long, and I actually feel bad for him. I feel sorry for him in this way, that no matter what you think about the guy, back pain, neck pain, I mean, it's some of the worst pain that you could experience. I don't have chronic back problems, but my back sometimes gives me problems. I just go walking. If I'm walking in a park, who doesn't like to walk in the park? I could just be walking in the park, and within 15 minutes, my lower back is killing me. Which is probably a very bad sign for when I get older. And my lower back just ends up being sore for the rest of and I can't get comfortable. I don't know what to do. And that's just me. This guy's had 9 back surgeries. Now imagine the pain that he had to be in to commit to 9 back surgeries. I think they implanted some kind of stimulator in his back, like a device. I mean, this guy, his back probably looks like a jigsaw puzzle. So, and I feel bad for him for that, because nobody should have to live in constant pain like that. So for him to travel to Mexico for a stem cell treatment and have them sticking needles in him, he must be pretty desperate. But he says it does help his lower back. The only drawback is it doesn't last very long. So it only helps, but temporarily. When you're in that kind of pain, though, you'll fly all over the world to get relief. Kevin Nash, he just tweeted the other day about a stem cell procedure that he and Ryback both flew to Colombia for. In fact, I think he might still be in Colombia. And he swears by it. I think that same clinic has done stem cell treatments for Rey Mysterio, which, look, if it's for his knees, that might explain how good he looked when he came back to WWE. He was moving around out there like he was 20 years younger. And I think he has stayed largely injury-free with his knees the last few years. The last injury, I know he was out with a shoulder injury. That was kind of a freak thing. But he's been moving around a lot better than he was just a few years ago, where it seemed like his legs were made of glass. Maybe you can credit that to the stem cell treatments. Who knows? But he talked about Dr. D, David Schultz. Hogan used to be very good friends with him. They would travel together. They roomed together back in the day. Imagine all of the cocaine that was being done. I can't even fathom. Schultz once said that Hogan was called the Tampa Pipeline because of all the drugs that people could bum off of him. This is what Schultz has said. And I'm sure those two had gone on some fun, had some fun nights out, I'm sure, in their day. And they had a falling out at one point. Anyway, Hogan said that Schultz shot his own angle one night where he slapped Mr. T at ringside. Mr. T then hopped the guardrail. Chief Jay Strongbow had to call the cops to separate them, and they carried Schultz out in handcuffs. This would have been at the LA Forum. Now, according to Schultz's version of events in a shoot interview that he did with Hannibal on Hannibal's YouTube channel a few years ago, he and Mr. T were cool. They took pictures together backstage before the show that night. They were totally cool. They were coup de la with each other. This wasn't very long after the John Stossel incident where he slapped John Stossel for insinuating or saying that wrestling was fake. And, it's been said, well, by slapping Stossel, that's why Schultz ultimately was fired. In fact, that may not have been what happened, and it may have been the stuff with him and Mr. T. at this show that got him fired from the company, because they didn't want him to go near Mr. T. They were worried about what might happen. And in his mind, I'm cool with Mr. T. I got no problems. But if he's mouthing off to me from ringside, I'm going to play into it. You know, I'm going to talk back to him. I'm not going to beat the guy up or anything. So it may have been a case where he was explicitly told, do not engage with Mr. T, and he did, and he got fired. Again, I don't know if that ultimately is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. He did admit that Strongbow called the cops, and the cops cuffed him, and they hog-tied his legs, and they put guns to his head as they carried him to the back. People saw them putting guns to this man's head. He had no gun. He wasn't armed. They put 2 guns to his head, and they carried him to the back. And when they got him to the back, they untied him. They put their guns down, and they threw his bags out the back door, and they told him to leave and never come back. So that's his version of events. But Hogan says, because all this happened, the original idea for the WrestleMania main event went down the tubes. He said the original idea for the WrestleMania main event for a tag team match was not Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff against Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. It was Roddy Piper and David Schultz against Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. Now, I had never heard that before. Again, it's from Hogan, so it's frustrating because I want to believe that to be true, because I actually think that would have been a better main event in terms of having Schultz and Piper, you know, and all the mouthing off and everything in advance of the event. I think that would have been ridiculous. But Hogan says the whole idea for the stuff with Mr. T at WrestleMania was David's idea in the first place. So again, I've never heard that before, but Roddy Piper and Dr. D as a team against Hogan and Mr. T would have been a hell of a main event. You know, the way that Schultz could have instigated things with him, he and Piper both. I mean, my God, the 2 of them as a team, that'd be a recipe to get thrown off television right there. Against Mr. T, no less, and some of the racial shit that these guys would say to get heat back in the day. Oh my God. Are you kidding me? They would be blackballed from everything if that happened today. And probably rightfully so. I mean, some of the things that Dr. D said was just, you know, way over the line. Even back then, when he was in the AWA, some of the stuff he would say about Hogan being on the beach, which, you know, Mean Gene would be blushing. He would be turning away. He would be so ashamed of what this guy was saying. But look, Schultz still, regardless of the shit that he was saying, he was a hell of a promo. And Piper was too. You put the 2 of them together, they could have sold that main event by themselves. Hogan told the story about going into WrestleMania 3, not knowing if Andre the Giant would lay down and lose to him. He claims that he sketched the entire match out on a legal pad, and he gave it to Vince McMahon. He put a question mark next to the slam at the end and told Vince, don't show this to Andre, because if he knows I wrote all of this out, he'll kill me. And then, wouldn't you know, the match went virtually spot for spot how Hogan wrote it down on that legal pad. Sadly, he did not repeat his usual claims to Austin that Andre was 800 pounds at the time, and he tore every muscle in his back when he slammed the nasty, stinky giant, and that Andre died 6 days later. Look, Hogan is a worker. Always has been, always will be. He's an old school guy, which is why I don't believe for a second, my opinion, I have nothing to base this on, my gut, I don't believe for a second that he didn't know what Andre was going to do beforehand, or that Andre might, you know, he's going to go into business for himself. It's possible. It is possible. I just don't believe that. You know, Andre was allegedly paid a lot of money to do that WrestleMania match, to do the job. He knew in advance what he was promised and what he had to do. He could barely move during that match. He was in so much pain. And he liked Hogan. Hogan said as much in the interview. You know, when they had their first match at Shea Stadium in 1980, he says Andre hated him. By the time they got to the Silverdome 7 years later, they were cool. And any idea that Andre, you know, might not have wanted to lose because he was undefeated for 15 years, that's how they marketed the match, that's a total sham. Andre lost plenty of matches before that. He was not undefeated. Just like the narrative that Andre had never been slammed before. It's like, not only was he slammed before, many, many, many times, he was slammed by Hogan before. At least 4 or 5 different times. That's just from what I've seen on video. Who knows what I haven't seen? And who knows how many other times he was slammed by all the other people who did it. Kamala slammed him. Harley Race, he just passed away. He slammed him. Outside once. He once slammed Andre outside on the concrete floor. But there's a certain mythology around Andre that people are very protective of, which makes him even more larger than life. And I understand that. You want to protect the legend. He was legendary all on his own, but why not embellish and exaggerate? That's kind of what they do. Not just with Andre, that's just what they do. Because they're workers. You want to see something cool? I saw a video once of Dusty Rhodes, of all people, giving Andre the Giant a flying head scissors out of the ring. When he was younger, he was incredibly agile for a guy of his size. Andre, that is. Although, I guess Dusty probably was too. But yeah, if you can imagine Dusty Rhodes giving a flying head scissors over the top rope to Andre the Giant. Something that actually happened. Both men admitted that they regret not working with each other. Hogan wanted the match at WrestleMania 18. I think a lot of people wanted the match and thought that was going to be the match at WrestleMania 18. Austin said that he still held a grudge at that time against Hogan. He held a grudge against him for years. Because right when he thought he was about to break through as Stunning Steve in WCW back in '94, he thought he might be the next Ric Flair. Which, of course, he says now is foolish because there's never going to be another Ric Flair. But he thought he was on the cusp of breaking out. And all of a sudden in '94, here comes the biggest box office attraction of all time. Coming over from WWE, and it's like, how the hell am I supposed to overcome this? I'm going to be mid-card for life now. And then there's stories that he wanted to work with Hogan, and either Hogan said no or Bischoff said no. So Austin was not very happy at all at the end of that run, which is why he was playing games, and they would call him, and where are you? And the whole story about Bischoff could hear him in the background telling his wife what to say, and he's basically like, fuck this guy, and he fired him. And of course, the rest is history. But years later, history repeated itself. 2002, Austin, he had already broken through. He was already the biggest star in the company, but here comes Hogan. Here comes Hulk Hogan. And Austin had to be worried on some level about what that was going to mean for the locker room and what that was going to mean for his spot, them bringing these guys in after however many years of them being portrayed as some kind of locker room cancer. And Austin was already friends with Kevin Nash. He had a friendship with Nash that went back a number of years. But it's like, here we go all over again. But it's the biggest attraction that never was. You could talk about The Rock and Shawn Michaels and what a great match that would have been. You could talk about Undertaker and Andre. What would have happened if the two of them had a match? Especially if Andre was not as crippled up as he was there at the end. Like a younger, more agile Andre the Giant against a slightly younger Undertaker from like that mid-2000s period when he had this sort of renaissance with a lot of his matches. Put that Undertaker in the ring with Andre. That would have been a hell of a match. So you could talk about all of those things. Undertaker and Sting, all these matches that never were. Stone Cold and Goldberg. But the biggest match, the biggest attraction that we never got to see is Hulk Hogan against Stone Cold Steve Austin. And the time to do it would have been WrestleMania 18 in Toronto. Now Rock played the boos of the crowd off really well. I don't know if Austin would have been able to do that. It may have rattled him a little too much. Because Hogan was beloved in Toronto. He tried to murder The Rock with an 18-wheeler in the weeks leading up to that match. And when he walked out that night, you would think it was Orange Gandhi walking out to the ring. The man could do no wrong. You do that match in Houston at WrestleMania X7, and you get a very different reaction. So we'll never see Austin, eat the big leg drop, but at least we do have that one time that Austin gave Hogan a stunner. It was one of those May 2002 episodes of Raw. I think it was after the show. Because, WWE puts these DVDs out, Raw after the show. They put a whole disc out, I think, of nothing but segments from when Raw would go off the air. And there was one night in May of 2002, Hogan was back being a babyface at this point, and Austin, this was, still a few weeks before he walked out on the company. But Austin was being beaten down by the NWO, and down came Hogan, and the two of them cleared house. And then when Hogan turned around, kick, wham, stunner. Down he goes. And then they drank beers together. So at least we got to see that. One story I had not heard, Hogan says he was told that he had heat after coming into the locker room for the Raw 15th anniversary show in 2007 and not shaking hands. He was either shaking hands or saying hello to CM Punk. But he says he didn't blow him off on purpose. He didn't see him. He didn't see anybody. He had tunnel vision as he was walking down the hallway because his mind was on all of the personal problems that were going on at the time in his life with his wife. I've never understood the whole handshake thing. I think it's stupid. I understand it's done for respect and you wanted it. It's stupid. I'm sorry. It's stupid. You miss one person, you've got heat. You're being disrespectful. It's just so stupid. It's so dumb. Hogan told the story about pitching a heel turn on the Ultimate Warrior after their match at WrestleMania 6 and calling himself Hollywood Hulk Hogan, or for short, Triple H. Now, he's told this story before. He wanted to be Triple H before there was even a Triple H. And Vince McMahon balked at the idea and would not let him do it. He would not let him turn heel. First of all, heel Hogan in 1990 would not have worked. I don't believe heel Hulk Hogan in the WWF in Now, maybe if he would have gone to WCW, you could portray him as the enemy. Maybe then it would have worked. But in WWE in 1990, people weren't ready for that. I don't believe people were ready to see heel Hogan at that point. Late 91, 92, maybe. Because he was already starting to get some of those boos mixed in with some of his reactions. But in 90, I don't want to say he was at his peak. I think his peak was 86, 87. Like true peak of popularity. But he was still, the biggest babyface in all of wrestling. So I don't think it would have worked. I think it would have worked about as well as Stone Cold heel turn worked in 2001. And there's a reason why Austin wasn't a heel anymore by the time the fall rolled around at the end of that year. So that's first. Second, it's hard for me to believe, as much convincing as it is said had to be done in 96 to get Hogan on board to turn heel and join the NWO, it's just hard for me to believe that at a time when he was still very much over as a babyface, in his prime earning years, that he would have willfully pitched a heel turn for himself, and all of the merch money that he was making as a babyface at the time, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, all that crap. But then I just find it hard to believe he would have even pitched the idea and pushed for it. But the cynic in me would say, well, it's exactly the sort of thing I could see him pitching, because he knows that I'm losing my championship, which means the Ultimate Warrior is going to be positioned as the number one babyface. I don't want to be number two. I want to keep working with the Warrior in main events. I want to be able maybe to trade the belt back and forth with him. The only way to do that is to turn heel. So there is in the back of my mind this notion, well, I don't know, maybe Hogan's not a stupid guy. Maybe there is a way that would have explained why he would have pitched a heel turn back then, but I'm very skeptical. He did admit the way that he acted after the match was done as a way to keep people looking at him as he left and not the Warrior. He wanted all the attention on him and not the new champion. He did admit that. And Austin said that he loved the finish with Hogan doing the kick out at 3 1/4. And you know what? I'm with Austin on that. I didn't have a problem with it either, because not every match has to end with the other man being unconscious. The idea was, here's a match that could have gone either way. These guys were very evenly matched. It could have gone either way. Warrior got the win, but it was a close call. Nothing wrong with that. I liked it too. Still one of my favorite matches. He said he and Randy Savage were best friends for a very long time, but he kind of, as he was talking about his friendship with Randy Savage and what great friends they used to be, he kind of buried Brutus Beefcake, I thought, which maybe that wasn't his intent, but that's what he did. And it was surprising, not for any reason other than the fact that they had their falling out, and I know they made up recently. They kind of patched things up. Hogan even inducted Brutus into the Hall of Fame this year. But when Brutus was mentioned, Hogan was just very, dismissive of their friendship almost, and talked about him, years ago. He was like when I found him, he was a lost puppy dog, and he was the sort of person who followed you around, which he did. He said they used to make fun of him when Brutus was younger. They would tell him, oh, hey, we're going to meet up at such and such time to go to the gym. And then Brutus would show up and nobody would be there. I mean, he was really kind of going hard on him here and just being very dismissive of someone who I thought was one of his best friends. So, I don't know, maybe not. Hogan told a story about the one and only time that he ever had an issue in the ring with Randy Savage. He was in Paris, France. After Hogan lifted Elizabeth into the ring, she was managing him at the time, so this had to have been around 89. And there were no stairs to the ring. So he had to lift Elizabeth into the ring by her armpits, over the top rope, and like a child, and put her down in the ring. And he said Randy saw this, and he is on the opposite side of the ring, and he starts cussing Hogan out. He's like, you son of a bitch, you grabbed her boobs. And Hogan's, because Hogan's like, I didn't grab her boob. I'm just helping her into the ring. So, you son of a bitch. You grabbed her boobs, huh? So he grabs a side headlock, Savage does. He's squeezing Hogan's head a little too tight. Hogan says, I didn't want my eyeball to pop out. And he threatened to dump Randy on his head if he didn't let go. And he said Savage was pissed at him. They had a horrible match. And then back in the dressing room, Hogan said, we need to talk. And when he reached to open the door came off its hinges. He said it was so old, it was so rotted by termites, it just came right off. And after that, Savage apologized to him for getting angry. Hogan apologized for touching his wife in an inappropriate way. But there were no steps, he said. No steps. Well, I'm a nerd. So, of course, I had to look this up because my bullshit detector was making noise. I take it wherever I go. The only record during that time of a match between these two guys in Paris, France, was October 13th, 1989. They were in the main event. Savage had Sherry in his corner. Hogan came out with Elizabeth. You can find video of the match on the World Tour 1990 Coliseum home video, which is on the network. Elizabeth looks stunning, as always. But not only were there steps to climb into the ring, Elizabeth walked up those steps into the ring. She was not carried into the ring by Hogan. She was not hoisted into the air by Hogan. Hogan never laid a hand on her. He didn't carry her over the top rope into the ring. Now, maybe Hogan conflated this with a match in a different city. This would have been 30 years ago. People get their details mixed up and their dates mixed up. Or in the case of Andre, their weights and the day of their death mixed up, but that's a different story. But again, this is what happens when you tell so many tall tales. It makes you doubt everything that comes out of the person's mouth. And when one of the parties is dead and they can't speak for themselves or defend themselves, you're only getting one side of the story. You can't go straight to the source to get their side. We can only trust that this is what really happened. And Savage said, I'm sorry. And they were bosom buddies again after that. Hogan copped to stealing the cupping of the ear thing from Austin Idol. He admitted that Hulkamania was a takeoff of Idolmania, which he says Idol used to reference, he took that from the Beatles. Everybody takes from somebody else with these wrestlers. It's like there's nothing... Like I saw the interaction on Twitter the other day where Donovan Dijak tweeted something, and maybe it was tongue-in-cheek, but he tweeted something to tell, like, hey, Taz, can I use the Taz mission? And Taz, went off on him. Totally serious, totally deadpan, went off on him and said, this is really a conversation that belongs in DMs and not public. And it's like, get the fuck over yourself. Again, I don't know if Dijak was being serious or not, but at least he's coming to you to ask for permission. He doesn't have to do shit. If he wants to start using the move, he can start using the move. These moves are trademarked now? Are these moves copyrighted? Are you out of your mind? When was the last time Taz wrestled a match? It's not your move. I couldn't believe that. But at least here, Hogan admitted, hey, I jacked this stuff from Austin Idol. I didn't come up with it myself. He regrets using the leg drop as a finish. because of all the physical damage it did to his back, and he joked that he should have gone with the sleeper hold as his finish instead. I don't think he would have gotten over quite as well with a sleeper hold as his finish. Hogan said he is a big fan of Kevin Owens and his work. This I have to defend Hogan on. For all the people calling BS on this, he said this as far back as 2015. That he was a big fan of Kevin Owens. This was back when Owens was still in NXT. He had just made the main roster. He was feuding with John Cena, but he was still the NXT champion at the time. So it's not as though he just sort of pulled that out of his ass here in this interview. He said it years ago when Owens was still, in WWE world, he was still a nobody. And he was saying this even then. He said that Owens reminded him of one of those old wrestlers from the 70s. They don't have a great build, but if they sat down next to you at a bar, you would be scared shitless. So that's a cool hat trick for Kevin Owens. Every man now in the opening segment of WrestleMania 30 is a KO fan. He and The Rock have always been very chummy, especially on social media. Stone Cold has gone on record as saying that he's a fan of his, and in fact, he even gave him his blessing to go ahead and use the stunner. And Hogan said that he's a fan of his as well. You won't find three bigger names in the business than those three people, other than maybe Ric Flair. Hogan made a point here before I wrap this up. This is a good point that he made about the WWE Performance Center. He's not a fan of guys being trained by the same people. He feels they should all be trained differently, and I agree with him 100%. The PC, it sounds like a great place to train and to learn, and they have modern technology there, and they have tools available to them that these guys didn't have 30 or 40 years ago that they probably would have killed for in terms of the exercise equipment. They have a promo room. You can get instant feedback from your trainers. The PC is a great place. I'm not putting it down, but it can't replicate the experience of traveling to different parts of the world and learning different styles from different people. It can't replicate working in Mexico and then doing a tour in Europe and then going to work and live in Japan for 6 months. It's not the same thing. I saw that Gangrel and Chris Sabin are guest coaching this week at the Performance Center. That's great. It's great that they bring in people from different backgrounds with different styles to guest coach for a week at a time. But at the end of the day, it is still the same people that they're learning from in the same facility, in the same city, every single day. I just don't see how that's better than working different territories with different people. And finally, Austin brought up Hogan's movie, the Hogan biopic, that is currently in development, and Hogan said that he really believes that Chris Hemsworth, who has been tapped to play him in the movie, can win an Academy Award for playing Hulk Hogan. I wouldn't hold my breath on that. Although Chris Hemsworth is a fine actor. So, hey, stranger things have happened. But I will not hold my breath on anything relating to Hulk Hogan netting somebody an Academy Award. I enjoyed this, just being able to listen to the two. You get two of the biggest stars of all time just sitting around shooting the shit. If you can get past some of the usual Hogan stories that sound dubious, there's other things he reveals in there that sound actually refreshingly honest for Hogan. And look, were it not for Hulk Hogan, I probably would not be a wrestling fan right now. I grew up watching this man. He still has the best theme music of all time. I don't care what anybody says. I will never not sing along to Real American.